David Cameron has announced that the UK should be prepared to use its prowess to help defeat the ISIS. He has also wanted an alliance with Iran. Cameron's remarks came as dozens of ISIS leaflets were distributed in London's Oxford Street. Meanwhile, a successful British rapper is reported to have posted a photograph of himself holding a severed head on Twitter. Are these events related? Is the government trying to spread fear in society for its military or security plans? How real is Cameron's remarks about combating the ISIS? To discuss such issues, I have interviewed two prominent political observers. On one hand, the British government warns of the grave dangers imposed by the British ISIS members who are about to come back from Iraq or Syria. And on the other hand, these are the very people who the government was supporting during the last 2 years.
There is something incredibly bizarre coming out of the British government. I think David Cameron and the British system, in effect, are sort of blowing hot and cold over this whole ISIS issue. On the one hand, they're describing ISIS as the biggest threat to British interests in almost a decade. But on the other, they're actually allowing many recruits to openly recruit, to openly distribute leaflets, to openly perform the sort of communication of this group. So there is something very bizarre in the British political position on ISIS. But I think what it actually indicates is the need for the establishment to have some sort of bogeyman, some sort of scaremongering issue that it can use and rattle at any given opportunity. I mean, we know that Britain is still recovering from the recession, the unemployment remains high, the housing bubble is about to burst. So there are many things that are worrying the British public, and I think there needs to be a distraction. And what better than a Muslim organisation that really ticks all the boxes of evil? You know, it's almost Hollywood film-like evil that can be used from time to time by the British state to say, well, listen, this is what we're fighting, instead of actually tackling the issues that are really important to the British public.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Where did ISIS get all their weapons from? They've got some quite sophisticated weaponry. And most of that weaponry has come from Western money, not directly, a lot of it through Saudi Arabia and Prince Bandar when he was in charge of intelligence in Saudi Arabia. And so one has to ask, where did ISIS get their weapons? Well, of course, they got them from people like the Free Syrian Army, which was being supported by Britain, in fact being supported by the entire London media for several years in their attacks on President Assad. And this is the way that the Western forces work these days, is they create these enemies. Now, one of the problems is now that enemy is supposed to be the bad guys. 1 minute they're the good guys, next minute they're the bad guys. This exact same thing was pointed out during the Syria conflict when we were being told, well, Al-Qaeda, they're terrible, they did 9/11, they're the bad guys. And suddenly, when people who are ex-Al-Qaeda fighters are fighting in Libya and Syria, now they're the good guys. So their story is starting to fall apart. Any intelligent person around the world can start to see this. The only trouble is, of course, this kind of view is very rarely, if ever, put in the Western media. So ultimately, it's a game that's being played, and I think we're starting to see that the ISIS organisation, with their black flags that they wave around, that's actually something which has been fuelled by the Western encouragement of the rebellions in Libya and Syria. And also important to note that this is a very sophisticated organisation with military supply lines, bank accounts, and a whole kind of administration behind it. And the West, if it wanted to, could close that down in no time. Within 5 seconds, they could close those bank accounts, they could close those, have sanctions on the organisations, they could close that organisation down that's backing up ISIS. But they won't do it because they want this hornet's nest to attract disgruntled people in the Middle East and to create even more chaos. They failed in Syria, they hope they're going to succeed with ISIS in Iraq and Syria. But unfortunately, I think this is ultimately going to fail. We will have to see how it all works out, but one thing's for sure, ISIS is a creation ultimately of the West, and those people who are attracted into it are being duped by the West in the same way as many people who were fighting on both sides back in the old medieval crusades.
And shortly after Camron's remark, leaflets of ISIS supporters are distributed in London, spreading fear throughout the society. Are these links related?
It's very bizarre that an organisation such as ISIS, which is obviously known to be a terrorist organisation that has been described as such by everyone, and particularly by the British government, could be allowed to distribute so openly leaflets in an attempt to recruit potential members to travel to Iraq and perform the supposed jihad. So it is a very alarming development, I think, that this organisation that is described as so dangerous, so threatening to British interests in particular, could actually be allowed to operate with such ease in the streets of London.
Well, you can see it's quite clear that London is secretly cooperating with ISIS, is allowing these kind of groups to operate, doing leaflets here in London. We had back in 2004, 2005, in the run-up to the London bombings, we had similar sorts of groups operating at Finsbury Park Mosque, the main mosque in London. And the people in the mosque reported these groups to the police, reported them to the security services, and those security services did absolutely nothing about them. Abu Hamza, who was one of those people, was reporting that he was working closely with British security services. So again, evidence for extreme Islamic groups working under the cover of being created by NATO intelligence, Mossad, Israeli intelligence, MI6 and the CIA.
So can we say that in contrast with Camron's claims, the ISIS is in fact acting for the interests of Britain in the Middle East?
I think ISIS at the moment represents probably the biggest threat to the Middle East, but probably to the wider Muslim world. It's an incredibly dangerous organisation. Its aims are very divisive. It's really stoking hatred within the Muslim community, but of course it's also targeting minorities. It's in blatant violation of every single Muslim value that has actually made the Muslim world and made Muslim history. So it's very bizarre that an organisation such as this could even recruit. It's a very hard sell, really. ISIS is a very hard sell for any young Muslim to be attracted to an organisation that actually represents everything that is wrong with the society, and it's incredibly detrimental to the Muslim world. So it is blatantly clear at this moment that ISIS doesn't represent Muslim interests, but obviously works, if anything, for those parties who are in opposition to the Muslim world and to Muslim unity. I think this is what needs to be said and done, and I think this is why ISIS is a very dangerous organisation. I think that and this is really why most Muslims are actually fiercely opposed to this dangerous organisation.